ഇപ്പോൾ ലോക്സഭയിലേക്കാണ് അവിടെ ദുരന്ത നിവാരണ സമിതി ബില്ലുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട ചർച്ച.
For dealing with states and other ministries and departments of the Union. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, this bill, in its ostensible pursuit to decentralize the decision-making process regarding funds, manages to do something utterly bizarre. It dilutes the entire purpose of a National Disaster Response Fund by removing the specific uses for which the fund was intended. One of the most pressing criticisms of the old Act was the excessive centralization of fund allocation. Many of our states have complained about this, especially when disasters are categorized as severe. The debilitating human cost of such a disaster demands from the center a sense of urgency, completely absent in the proposed framework. That the center is bereft of the sense of urgency, let alone of any compassion. It has proved very often, especially when disaster relief funds from the NDRF were casually denied to Tamil Nadu and only disbursed to Karnataka after an inordinate delay. In 2023, when Tamil Nadu and Karnataka found themselves on the brink of catastrophe, they were compelled to move the Supreme Court to access the much-needed NDRF funds. Funds they had a claim to. In Karnataka, and yes, Himachal has been mentioned, others I'm sure will do so. Let me speak of the cases I know. In Karnataka, 196 out of 236 taluks had been officially designated as severely drought-affected by the interministerial central team, and the subcommittee of the National Executive Committee recommended financial aid for the state, but despite this, the state, Congress ruled, I admit, had to wait over 6 months to receive the funds, long after the prescribed 1-month period following the IMCT report. This deplorable delay deprived the state of essential resources to protect its citizens and frankly violated their fundamental right to life of the people of Karnataka. Tamil Nadu suffered a similar fate as well, especially in the aftermath of Cyclone Michaung, when there was a complete dearth of necessary funds and the central government was indifferent. Now, while we in Kerala had long been demanding that the Wayanad landslide be declared a national disaster, this request was dismissed in a letter to me by the MOS Home on 10th November, claiming there were sufficient funds in the State Disaster Relief Fund. The justification provided was that existing guidelines on the SDRF and NDRF offer no provisions for such a declaration. The lack of financial aid from the NDRF, under the perversely misguided assumption that the SDRF would suffice, has left us in an unenviable position, sir. With no interim aid forthcoming, Kerala has been left with no option but to insist on the declaration of a landslide as a level 3 disaster, which will at least allow for the mobilization of some resources and support. But many of us had raised this much earlier. No sooner had the landslides ravaged Wayanad, I wrote to the Honourable Home Minister on the 31st of July, requesting him to recognize this monumental cataclysm as a calamity of severe nature in terms of paragraph 8.1 of the MP Lads guidelines. So we could have all helped at that time. We could have recommended works up to 1 crore, I beg your pardon, from MP Lads funds. But the request was ignored. The Minister of State wrote to me in early November to tell me that the Inter-Ministerial Central Team, IMCT, had visited Wayanad from the 8th to 10th of August, and the central government would take action based on its request. August, sir. They're supposed to take action within 1 month according to the existing Act. To this date, no action has been taken and no additional funds have been arranged for Wayanad. How can we accept this? Now, this bill, Mr. Chairman, is an excellent case of minimum decentralization, maximum declamation, at which, of course, this government excels. Indeed, even one of the bill's better provisions is undermined by the government's refusal to walk the talk. I refer to the creation of separate urban disaster management authorities in state capitals and cities with municipal corporations, except Delhi and Chandigarh. This has been introduced to foster greater coordination than what is possible under the disaster management authorities in our big urban centres. But even while it takes a step which otherwise I would have applauded, the centre fails to provide for any necessary financial devolution, without which this measure will be toothless, sir. While the government appears to have recognized that district administrations across India should tackle emerging threats on their own terms and in line with local conditions, it has overlooked the dismal fact that in our country the total municipal expenditure accounts for barely 0.79% of GDP. Paise kahan hai? Given that this bill focuses on disaster risk reduction rather than post-disaster management, it's crucial that the government realize that urban local bodies need to be financially empowered, as in other countries, to amass resources to institute, equip and run urban disaster management authorities and discharge their risk reduction obligations to the letter. For risk reduction activities to be conducted at the local level, the creation of infrastructure that bolsters the vitality and vigor of urban local bodies is vital. But this bill is silent on the issue, offering no real resources to revitalize India's urban local bodies. Now, this creation of these bodies could have been a good step towards sustainable urban spaces, but it will be useless without effective devolution of finances and authority, Mr. Minister. This needs to be amended, this half-baked provision. Another damaging aspect of this bill, it seeks to weaken the National Executive Committee and the state executive committees, staffed to the level of secretaries to the governments of India and the states, which are supposed to formulate national level and state level disaster management plans. If this bill passes, the NDMA and the SDMAs will instead assume this power. At the same time, these committees will remain the coordinating bodies for relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction during and after natural disasters, saddling them in effect with the responsibility for exercising disaster management plans that they did not formulate. So you've got to execute something that you did not actually come up with. This flies in the complete logic of the original purpose of these committees, which was to foster greater collaboration amongst various ministries of the union and state governments. Federalism, cooperative federalism. Where is the cooperative federalism here? So the bill's major weakness has throughout been its inability to innovate on institutional mechanisms to deal with disaster risk. Although it achieves coordination for greater risk management, it offers no clarity on how to achieve such coordination in practice amongst a wide range of institutions, split both vertically and horizontally, and including non-government, private and civil society elements. By the way, Mr. Chairman, and the Minister has not noted this, disaster relief, rehabilitation and reconstruction is still not a justiciable right in India. The Indian state has for far too long undertaken relief measures as an obligation, not a duty. It must discharge that duty in fulfillment of its citizens' inviolable rights. This has been an issue for years, but the bill would have been an opportunity to fix it, because we are learning lessons from what hasn't worked in the earlier version. You've instead squandered it, Mr. Minister. You will, of course, carry out relief assistance up to your whims, your political expediencies. You may provide ex gratia compensation. You may provide relief items, compensation for destruction of houses, etc., destruction of boats, fishing equipment, farming equipment, etc. But all of this will vary from place to place, and it must change. Disaster relief must be a fundamental right of all Indian citizens. It's also important, so one important negative factor of this bill that testifies to its lack of imagination, creativity, and reluctance to accept the bleak realities of our environment.